Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Blue to Green podcast, and I'm your host, AJ Jacobs. On today's episode, I have a current police officer here in the state of Arizona who is also an attorney that has worked for the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, as well as the Arizona Attorney General's Office. He represents what law enforcement can be at its best: dignified, honorable, and treating people with respect. I asked him to come onto this podcast to talk about what's going on in the world, through his eyes and his perspective on a personal level. Everything on this podcast expressed is his opinions and does not speak for law enforcement as a whole, nor does he speak for any law enforcement agency. So I appreciate him coming on and being able to be open and honest. But his ability to be open and honest only depends upon the fact that I can't identify him. And the reason for that is because in the world that we live in right now, law enforcement is a target. And until I'm at a place where I have built a rapport and the world can see what I'm trying to do here, and I can show them what I'm doing and bringing the cannabis community and law enforcement communities together, just kind of the way it needs to be. With that being said, I'm looking forward to getting some good feedback to help guide future conversations and opening up and seeing, again, what this is all about. I appreciate everybody's patience. I have a couple of technical difficulties, and again, I'm figuring out all the equipment and all that good stuff, and this is a brand new journey for me, so I appreciate your guys' patience and coming along with me. So thank you very much for tuning in. I hope everybody learns a little something from this, and I can grow from there and continue to get you to watch and listen, and I hope I can grab your attention. So thank you very much, everyone. Take care, and I'll talk to you all soon. Check. Oh, it's because I'm a moron. How we doing now?
I can hear you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining in. My name is AJ Jacobs. Having some technical difficulties, I apologize. With me today, I have asked to come and sit with me is a current police officer here in the state of Arizona, and he's also a former attorney. He's an attorney. He used to work with the Arizona Attorney General's Office, and he used to work for the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. For purposes of keeping his identity safe, this is going to be an audio-only podcast, and we're not going to identify him by name because the entire point of this podcast is to bring people together, and I need him to be able to come here and speak freely and openly about his experiences about what's going on. So for the purposes of this podcast, we're going to call him Trooper. Trooper, who is a personal friend of mine, thank you very much for coming on to my podcast.
You're welcome.
All right. Sorry for all the issues I'm having today. So, could you give me just a little brief background about yourself?
I'm a native Arizonan. I went to high school here. I went to college here, and I went to law school here. I have lived abroad for a year of my life when I was in high school, but mostly my whole life has been in Arizona and in the metropolitan Phoenix area. I've lived all over the valley, different parts of my life, so I've got a pretty good idea of East Valley versus West Valley and Central Phoenix, although I try not to go to the west side too often. I do find myself there on occasion.
I'm very sorry about that. Could you explain to us what exactly led you to the law enforcement path?
I was thinking about that this morning, thinking you might ask me that. I think, like many people, probably the events of 9/11 were probably the biggest motivator. I had had a year in college. I went to college late, and that was I was in school when that actually happened, and I couldn't do anything immediately other than donate blood or try to do some volunteering because I was busy with school and it just didn't make sense to leave school at that time. I did think about getting into the military afterwards, but I wasn't qualified for military service, although apparently I am now. So I thought of other ways of serving my community. The other issue was I just couldn't stand to sit in an office all day, which is one of the reasons I'm not a practicing attorney today. And policing was one of those careers that, you could work for your community, enjoy the benefits of a government job while still being outside and doing things and not just, being subject to fluorescent lights all day.
And you and I worked together for 11 years. And again, one of the reasons why I did ask you to come on here is because of the fact you're one of the good guys. And the entire point of this podcast is to bring the communities together of law enforcement, the cannabis community,
and to show the cannabis community the human side of law enforcement, and to show the law enforcement officers that not all stoners are bad.
Right.
So there are some that have some criminal elements and criminal behavior, but that's with anything. So that's the whole purpose of that. And again, I respect you. I like you. And I'm very happy you're here. I was very excited because I haven't seen you in 4 years almost. We've spoken on the phone, but
I'm glad to be here too.
good. Thank you. I appreciate that. What made you become a lawyer? What was the intersection between those two?
Well, that was more of a family decision. And my family education is very important. I had my undergraduate degrees, and I wanted a graduate degree. And so really, after I was established in law enforcement, it was really, what degree do I want to get? And I was thinking of life after law enforcement. So, but I didn't really want to walk away from government service, that sort of thing. So that kind of narrowed it down to a couple degrees, like an MPA, an MBA, or a JD.
Okay.
I've always liked the law. I enjoy arguing. There was an opportunity in Phoenix at the time to go to law school part-time. So I took that opportunity and just decided to get my my JD degree. I even told myself I don't have to pass the bar. I just need the degree. A lot of people, it's a wonderful degree to have. It's very portable. It teaches you to think and apply the law, as well as a lot of writing background and research background. So even if you don't become a licensed attorney, a JD, it can be a very practical degree to have.
Gotcha.
And then I did pass the bar. So
That's good. What school did you go to?
Arizona Summit Law School.
All right. We're not sponsored by them, but was it a decent school? Would you suggest it to other people?
I tell people it has its own, it had its own issues. The professors there were very qualified, and they taught me everything I need to know. I passed the bar. I passed it on the first try.
Nice.
And that was while working full time. So a lot could be said about the school, but it gave me what I needed to become an attorney.
Nice. Very cool. When you got out of law school, what area of practice did you decide to go into?
Initially, once I got my license, I wanted to keep, just for practical reasons like benefits and things like that, and I wanted to keep working for the state. So I got a job with the Attorney General's office, and then I went to I was assigned to a group of attorneys that represent the Department of Child Safety in juvenile court.
Okay.
And these are the what are called usually dependency cases, not to be confused with juvenile delinquent cases, because those are handled by the county attorney's office. So these are usually parents that are unable, or in some cases unwilling, to take care or provide for their juvenile children. And it gets to such a state. I mean, in many cases, people have problems. They go to their family or a close friend and have them intercede or something like that. It can all be done without a court. But unfortunately, in many cases, the state has to inject itself into a family dynamic to protect the child. And it's almost always done with the best intentions. But it's very difficult stuff. And some parents, I was very proud and happy when we had a reunification. You know, we dropped the case. The parent was able to solve the problems that were affecting them. But in often cases, it was, okay, what other options do we have for the child? And some of the stories that just came in were very, very heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So I decided to get back into something a little bit easier for me, and that was the criminal justice system.
Okay.
So I went over to one of the county attorney agencies in Arizona and became a prosecutor.
Very cool. And we did forget to say at the very beginning of this podcast, though, that our trooper here is a trooper and certified in the state of Arizona to practice law, but everything on this podcast is of his own personal experiences. He is not giving legal advice in any way, shape, or form. And on the law enforcement side of the house, again, he is not representing any agency, and he is here of his own free will, and he is not speaking for any police department or any agency. So, fair enough?
Oh, thank you very much, AJ. I appreciate that. Yeah, I would just recommend that if anybody does need legal advice, you contact either the Arizona State Bar, or if you're outside of Arizona, your local bar association, and they can certainly refer you and provide you with the guidance and counseling that you need.
There you go. So this is a cannabis podcast, but it's also a law enforcement podcast. And I want to dive into the cannabis world. I want to talk about what you on the road as a police officer are seeing with what is the date today? Today is March 2nd, 2021. So therefore, recreational is legal in the state of Arizona now, and it's fairly new. It's fairly recent that has happened. So what is the dynamic that you're seeing out there? Medicinal marijuana has been established for several years. That program's been in place. But regarding the recreational side of the house, what's going on?
Well, it's hard to say. There's a few things going on. One is I voted for Prop 207. That was my personal decision. I knew enough was enough. I've been on the prosecution side of marijuana, criminal justice, and the police side of it. And I was glad to apply my own personal beliefs. And I think it's, it's no more harmful than alcohol or even less so. So why can't it be treated like that? So a lot of my personal observations, even since the legalization, often I use the metaphor, what if we just replaced it with alcohol? How does that sort of seem? Because as destructive as alcohol is, it's part of our society.
Right.
It's regulated. I'm sure an argument could be made. There could be more regulations or even less regulations, like the proliferation of local breweries and distilleries. That's sort of, that's where a lot of regulations are changing. I don't see why marijuana can't fit into a regulatory matrix like that and provide the benefits while minimizing the costs and to society and to individuals.
Gotcha.
So with that, I think the first thing I noticed is that it's a few people just didn't understand that there are still limitations, just like there are with alcohol. I was talking with AJ earlier today, kind of imagining what it was like in 1933 when Prohibition was repealed. I imagine there were people with just fistfuls of glass jars with the local moonshine. They probably rolled their Studebakers and killed themselves or went blind because who knows what was in it.
Right.
So there are, they didn't just legalize marijuana. A lot of they could have just struck the language in 133405, but they didn't. They modified it. They took it from a felony. It's most cases it's a civil or a very
Right.
minor crime, but they did put in some things like the age limitations, where and when and how you get it. And maybe AJ, I don't pretend to know or understand all of Prop 207. Most of my focus has been in its application to the DUI.
Understood.
Because that's probably the biggest threat to public safety, as it is with alcohol. If you quietly drink alcohol in your home, just like if you quietly consume marijuana in your home, you're not in charge of anybody or anything like that. Is very little harm is going to come from that. If it is, it's the personal choice of an adult. Whereas if you're out there on the roads or you're in charge of somebody who can't make or take care of themselves, then it becomes a problem. And in my business, that's mostly the DUI aspect of it.
Understood.
So in my cases, I've run across right after the legalization, somebody under 21 was just smoking away while they were driving. I didn't pull them over for a particular moving violation. In fact, I think they were using their cell phone. So I stopped them for that. They rolled down the window. A waft of clearly marijuana smoke came out. She looked 21 to me. I didn't even think about it. But of course, the next question out of my mouth is, may I see your driver's license? And she handed it to me. And it's a vertical driver's license, which, it still could mean she's 21.
Right,
it just means
right.
it's an older one. But I, as a good officer, I look at the date of birth, and she still had several months to go to her 21st birthday. And the benefits of Prop 207 just aren't allowed for somebody who's under 21. But then it begged the next question, do you have a medical marijuana card? Because
Right.
that can be given at ages under 21. And she said no. This lady was very honest with me. And I asked her, you were just smoking it because I can smell it. And the smoke came out. And she didn't try to lie or anything like that. She wouldn't look me in the eye because she's more of embarrassed. But, she pulled up a nearly completed rolled marijuana cigarette. And at that point,
It's called a joint.
a joint.
I'm just
Okay.
kidding.
It's rolled in a brown paper. Anyway,
That could be a blunt.
I then conducted a DUI investigation, and she showed immediate signs of impairment. I arrested her and then processed her for DUI. During the interview, I asked her, as many officers do, at the time of the traffic stop or while you were driving, did you feel the effects? And I remember her response. She was very honest. I don't think she lied to me at any point in our time together. She was high as fuck when I stopped her. She wasn't then, and only about 45 minutes had probably elapsed by that time. And I remember thanking her for her honesty. But that's the sort of thing. It's the same if somebody, was drinking a bottle of beer or from a bottle of whiskey while driving. Whatever reason I come into contact them, whether it's they're driving themselves or maybe it's even a non-moving violation, that's probably going to trigger. Now, you could conceivably have a drink of alcohol and not be impaired or
Sure.
be at an 08.
Sure.
But it would be negligent for me to just let you go without
Sure.
determining that, one, because I don't want you to get hurt.
100%.
And, that's my my job, and I know a lot of people feel like um, Arizona has some of the strictest DUI laws, but in considering the results of a DUI gone bad, i.e., you hit somebody, you run somebody over, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that you hurt somebody else. I mean, this could be for your own protection,
Yeah.
because usually the first thing with alcohol consumption is your ability to make sound judgments.
This conversation, the DUI portion is coming up a lot in the cannabis community, because people ask the questions, can I smoke if I'm a patient and then drive? And then I've been asked this question a lot because of my background and because I processed and arrested hundreds, not hundred, I'm just kidding. DUIs were not my favorite thing, but I've processed hundreds of DUIs and seen the effects. And it's the sort of question where you get asked that question, oh, how soon can I smoke and then drive? And I've given my personal opinion on that and my personal opinion is it depends. And that's the hard part that the community is having a hard time getting over or understanding. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Just like, what does that mean? An hour, 2 hours, 3 hours?
Well, as a lawyer, I love the term "it depends." That's how we finance most of our ways, because it does depend. I know when I've seen somebody, when you stop somebody for alcohol, and I'll keep going back to that as the comparison. Most officers will joke with you that it's always 2 drinks.
Right.
All right.
Right.
But then this person can't even stand up straight,
Right.
or they're vomiting, and you're like, well, this is either the first day you've ever had alcohol in your life, or there's something else going on. Did you take some drugs or something with it? Or, of course, the more obvious reason is, what were the size of these 2 drinks?
Right.
Or
Right.
was it the first one and the last one and you don't remember everything in between?
Or was it 2 giant cups of Everclear?
Right, because you do sometimes have to be, some of these bars have these large
Yes.
32-ounce servings. So you do have to clarify that and speak the same language. I have very little personal experience with the effects of marijuana.
Okay.
I've always been a do-gooder. I did a couple things in high school, but I was always so nervous and so guilty. I don't know if it took. I don't remember. I just remember Bill Clinton later on. But with alcohol, that's something that has been studied,
Yeah.
and you can observe people who, even if you don't imbibe alcohol, you can observe them, and now you can do it more with marijuana too. But you can sit at a bar stone sober and begin to see things. Well, why is that guy walking like that? Or why is his eyes like that? Or there's also some certain physical traits that are just so common
Yep.
and understood to
Agreed.
be affected by alcohol. And I know we talked about this, AJ, as I would like for the scientific community to try to bridge the gap with marijuana use. Because if you tell me, yes, I'm a medical marijuana patient and I took my medicine this morning, well, logically, I know that there's probably THC flowing through your veins as you're driving and as we're
Absolutely.
speaking.
Absolutely.
But that's not necessarily a DUI.
Right. Right. Not at all.
Now, it might be if it's like methamphetamines or
Right.
something like that, because there's really no justifiable or legal use of methamphetamines. But marijuana has gone from being treated like methamphetamines to like a medicine. And, keeping in mind, ladies and gentlemen, you can get a DUI by taking your prescribed medication.
Right. Yeah, that is true.
Look
Very
at
true.
look at the labels on it. People overuse it, and it may be just something innocent like, I took my back pain medicine. I've always been fine, but because I slipped and fell this morning, I took 2.
Right.
But then I had to pick somebody up. It was urgent. I didn't expect to, but I just wasn't thinking. And maybe the medicine, and it's they've taken twice the dosing, and they're driving, and they're not necessarily thinking it because they're not sitting at a bar drinking.
Right. Right.
But those are kind of the adult decisions we make. But the burden is for the police officer is to show, at least in Arizona, that you are impaired to the slightest degree. Whatever it is that is in your body is impairing you to the slightest degree. And we usually do that through tools given to us by the scientific community,
Right.
known as field sobriety tests. And I know people say what they want with those. Sometimes they're just made up or things like that. But there's some real scientific basis to these. And they're not perfect. Nothing ever is.
Nothing is.
But as far as the scientific community goes, these are as close as we can.
There's consensus
There's
that
consensus.
there's scientific backing that certain tests can
Right.
show improvement to a certain percentage.
And there's standards, there's legal standards, there's the Fry standards and Daubert. that courts use. Like, you always ask, why aren't polygraphs admissible in court? Well, there's a good reason. It's because the scientific community cannot come to a consensus
Right.
that they're valid.
Right.
They are defeatable. They're not always consistent. And legal standards require, if we apply the same circumstances every time, will we get the same result?
Right.
And if generally the answer is yes, that's scientifically reliable. But the tools for marijuana, although there are some, don't have the resources that say, I mean, I have a device that I can put up to somebody's lips and they can exhale a very gentle standard exhale, like they're blowing half a breath to blow up a balloon, that can pretty reasonably and accurately, it's not perfect, tell me where they are as far as
Yep.
BAC.
Yep.
And maybe it's off by 5%, but if somebody's under 21, it really doesn't matter what the
Right.
amount is. It's
Right.
just that it's there. And this is a device that subject to the cold, to the heat,
Right.
getting dropped on the ground. And it's generally consistent with blood tests or more thorough breath tests.
And those machines may or may not be used at every party that an officer throws to see how
No,
much people are
certainly
drinking.
not.
No, I mean, no, they've never do that. I've never done anything like that. Never.
It's always for training purposes.
For training purposes only.
So it would be nice, or as a police officer, if the scientific community could fill some of those gaps
Yeah.
and get us some more. And I understand, just in broad scale, with the nature of marijuana in the United States, it's still illegal under federal law.
Right.
I have yet to see the FBI come out and issue a summons into
Right.
federal courts for what we would call personal use cases. But those laws are on the books, so
Yes.
it is always something that even a patient who's not recreationally using marijuana has to be concerned about. I know in my own case, we were worried about the business aspect of the marijuana industry, whether it's medicinal or not, and they're worried about going across federal laws.
Right.
And I've built up this business, and all of a sudden it was seized because it's a RICO violation or something like that. And that's a conundrum. It's difficult. But I generally enforce state law.
Right.
It doesn't mean I can't enforce federal law, or usually you just do something until the federal authorities can intercede
Right.
and exert their jurisdiction. And usually, the best example is, the president's in town, the gentleman has a map of the area, a long rifle, and, some very angry political bumper stickers or something like that. And he tells you, I'm going to get that guy. And you're like, maybe I should call the Secret Service.
Yeah, maybe
That's probably
this would be worth a higher up phone call.
Right.
Than yeah. Understand.
and we'll just wait for them. But with that's not going to happen with medical marijuana. Maybe.
So let me say though that is a huge concern in the community right now. I myself am a medical patient. I drive around to the dispensary and back and forth, and I have my medical marijuana on me. I admit that, and I will admit I'm a former cop, and I'm concerned about that. It's just that little thing in the back of your mind, knowing that there are still laws out there that are against the law.
So I would recommend to people the things to consider where your life crosses into the federal threshold. Travel to Mexico.
Yep.
Travel to another state,
Yep.
even though those two states might be, let's just say, marijuana friendly
Yep.
for whatever reason. By crossing state lines, the federal government, as part of its charter from the Constitution, is allowed to, when things cross state lines,
Yep.
that's when the federal government intercedes itself. The airport,
Yeah,
federal
that's-
security, even if it's domestic flight. Again, you're traveling from a friendly state to another friendly state. You've placed yourself into the federal basket that is the FAA, that has to follow federal law. It doesn't mean the police, they rely on local police forces to really enforce local laws. The federal government is its own entity.
Yep.
It's its own sovereign, and will do what it wants to do. Even though the president and Congress may change from time to time, laws are on the books.
Yes.
And usually law enforcement officers, generally the rule is you enforce them. Otherwise, if you're picking and choosing, well, how come he got
Right.
picked to be released and I didn't? And, why don't we just apply it fairly to everybody? So that's the idea.
Well, that can lead to an entirely different conversation,
Yeah.
though. That can lead, and especially in today's society where, and again, everything that I said on this podcast is my own personal feelings, your own personal feelings, and just observations. And that could also lead to what's going on in law enforcement right now. I don't want to touch on that yet. I want to kind of stay on this DUI portion, the international
Right.
travel as well. And I know that we are a border state. So you have people going to Mexico. You have people coming across Interstate 8 has, and I think down to Tucson maybe has the the border patrol checkpoints. You could potentially get hemmed up down there.
Yes, yes. And I mean, they might be, ladies and gentlemen, we're looking for large seizures,
Right.
but the dog can't communicate. I
Right.
smell a small amount of marijuana
Right.
versus a large amount. And then they're going to have to, how do they determine, something that they're not interested in? They're going to have to search your car
Right.
and know for themselves. In which case you're sitting on the side of the road, probably embarrassed. I don't know if they'll take your car apart or not. I don't know how the Border Patrol operates, but they do have the legal ability to
Yes.
do something like that.
Yes.
And, you don't want to be inconvenienced because you need this to treat your pain. So those are things to keep in mind. I would also mention cruise ships that travel outside. I know Arizona's medical law is reciprocal, meaning that if somebody from another state has whatever their state requires, you can use that here. And that's difficult because I know, like in California, it's literally a note from the doctor.
That is correct.
Whereas Arizona is much more regulated. You have a card or
Yes.
at least a
Referral.
300-digit number that we can use to verify if somebody's valid.
On that, see, and these are things as you're talking, you're bringing up really good points, and I do not mean to interrupt you, but you're bringing up really good points. That part of what I'm trying to accomplish is to educate the medical community. And regarding that card, now I've been out of the game for 4 years, but it's my understanding that even, let's say you pull over a medical patient and that person is a legitimate medical patient, they forgot everything at home, they're rushing out the door, whatever the case is, and and I'm sure you may have had this happen, but like, oh, just run me, you'll get my information, you'll get that I'm a medical card holder. Well, I'm assuming, I believe that's incorrect.
No, you can't. So with the Medical Marijuana Act, it incorporates some of the medical privacy laws that we know in our society and actually are very useful and protective. So it's not as easy like a gun permit where I typed your name and date of birth in and it says yes or no. You actually have to have not the card. You're not required to have the card, but a lot of people have a digital app now.
Yes.
But on that app is either a barcode or something for me to write down essentially your patient's serial number.
Yes.
For lack, I'm sure that there's a more appropriate term, but I can then type that into a database for law enforcement that tells me yes or no, you're a valid medical user. But if you don't have that, I can't go fishing. I know, like, there's times where somebody will say, I swear to God, my name's John Smith.
Right.
And it literally doesn't matter what your birthday is. Why don't you go ahead and give me your social security number?
Right.
And they're telling me the truth. But if I type John Smith into a database, it doesn't matter what the birthday. I'm going to get hundreds.
1 million of them. And this is the thing that, I'm trying to teach the community that, there's going to be a time, it's going to happen that a patient's going to get pulled over, they didn't have their stuff, and then it's going to come out, the cop was a dick, he kept barking at me, I needed my card, and I told him to run me, and it's like, and this is part of I feel as though my responsibility to also train them. It's like, you have to be a good steward of the law.
Right. It's no different than, let's just say you're under the age of 50 and you decide to go out to the bar one night. Okay. And the bartender or the doorman insists on seeing your ID. Would you get upset at the doorman if you left your ID at home? No, he's got a job to do. He doesn't want to lose his job. He doesn't want to cause the bar problems. And there's a set of rules. And we all know that if you want to imbibe alcohol, you need to show that you're 21. Nobody's in your house demanding your ID.
Right.
And again, I haven't walked into your house and said, hey, I smelled marijuana. Where's your card? You're on a public highway.
Yes.
In a vehicle that is heavily regulated by not only the federal government and the state, but even counties and cities with, street ordinances and things like that. So you've put yourself out into a place where you have less expectations of privacy and are subject to being seen and more government regulation. If you don't want to be hassled, don't go out.
That's agreed.
And it's not it's just one of those give and takes. We are trying to run a society while maintaining civil liberties.
Yes.
I've been in liquor enforcement situations. Hey, you can't hassle me. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you're in a liquor licensed establishment. You knew that.
It's regulated by
you've submitted
the government.
to that. You're welcome to leave and my inquiry will stop. But if you want to remain here, you have to follow the rules. So I would just recommend, if I'm not really sure, and AJ, maybe you can educate me, I believe that there's actually an app you get on your smartphone. At least you have that option.
I'm gonna put a plug out there, and this is not anything. I'm not paid or sponsored by this, but I actually a magazine from Cannabis Cactus. They have an app. That they have an app that you can directly link. It directly links to AZDHS.
Okay.
And then you can put in your information, and then you have your card with you
Right.
everywhere that you go.
And another easier way to do that is take a picture of your card.
That would work too.
I have a lot of young
That would
people
work
that
too.
take a picture of their driver's license.
That's a
In some
good
case,
idea.
that's very effective. I just took a picture of my COVID vaccination card,
Big
just
brain.
in case I lose it.
Big brain right there.
If you're from California and you just have that scribbled note from your doctor, go ahead and laminate.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Protect it. It's just easier. Take a picture of it in its pristine state.
Now, and I'm thinking through this. I'm thinking through the fact that even though it is now legal recreationally, let's say, people may be like, well, I don't need to have my card with me. Well, recreationally, you're not allowed to have over 1 ounce of flour. So let's say you do stop a med patient and he's got 2 ounces of flour. Well, that would be a situation where he's,
Right.
you're over 21, you've got your ID, and you're legally allowed to possess an ounce of marijuana, an ounce of cannabis, but you can't have 2 ounces. So this is a situation where it would benefit everybody to understand the fact that, hey, or let's say you've got your 2.5 ounces and it's all concentrate. Well, you can't do that under 207 as a recreational patient. And I'm not being nuanced here regarding the specific limits and all that, but I'm just saying that as a med patient, if you're over that ounce limit in any way, shape, or form, it's always good to have that card,
Right.
simply because it
A different set of rules
yeah,
applies.
yeah, exactly. Also less taxes. So I'm keeping my med card.
And it's probably easier going to other states too. At least some of the states are just dipping their toes into the water as far as medical, and that's seemingly, anecdotally seems to be the first step, because
Yeah,
California
yeah.
blazed that trail with just medical.
Yep.
The pillars of society did not cave in on themselves, although an argument could be said that California does have its share of problems. I don't think medical marijuana was
Right.
the basis for it.
Right.
That's my personal thought. And then other states just tried, legalization.
Yep.
And again, I'm sure there's, I've heard, I don't know of any specific studies, but I do remember reading about an uptick in fatalities of marijuana related automobile fatalities in Colorado.
Yes.
But it also may have been just because now that they legalized it, they're looking closer as to the results of these fatals when they weren't before, because it was illegal. If that makes sense.
I
So-
do have the study, and I know somebody's going to say something about it. I'm not saying it properly. Absolutely, the uptick did show a trend within the first year to 18 months that there was more cannabis DUIs, but then overall, the actual amount of DUIs in general came down. That's that little bit of information that doesn't get told as well. Yes, it absolutely went up, and then overall it came down.
And it could be just, the police agencies and the government saw the uptick and said, maybe we should just shift some resources
Right.
to DUI enforcement.
Right.
Let's train our officers a bit more. So now they're picking up the impaired driver a little bit better. I mean, there's so many aspects of policing.
Yes.
When you come out of the academy, you're legally able to investigate a homicide.
Right.
Doesn't mean you should investigate a
Doesn't mean
homicide.
you should touch
And the flip side of that too is you could have a 20-year homicide investigator. If he makes a traffic stop, he's not going to be able to process a DUI
At all.
because he's not. I mean, these are very specialized. Just like I have no idea how to write a will.
Right.
Well,
it's
actually,
not
I
your,
do know how to write
it's
a will,
not
but I
your
can't
thing.
write a trust.
Right.
And I wouldn't feel comfortable if somebody asked me. I'm legally qualified to do it, but it's just not my wheelhouse.
Right.
So you have to know your limits. I could learn it,
Of course.
but
of
I don't
course.
want to. I don't want to right now. So nobody's paying me to do it. So those are just the sort of things that it comes with specialization. So yeah, like in Colorado, they may have shifted some
Yep.
resources to that just to deal with it. And that's something like Arizona's always done. DUIs have always been a problem. They're a problem in every society, but it
Yes.
seems that the Arizona legislature and government in general has always been at the forefront of DUI changes and progressively, not necessarily harsher. We've had almost the same penalties. And
Right.
we've actually moved them up, and then we realized they're too harsh and brought them back. People just couldn't function. And just recently we added wrong way drivers because it seems to be a phenomenon here.
I didn't know that.
So driving wrong way while DUI is now an aggravated
Okay,
DUI,
okay.
whereas before it was still just a misdemeanor.
Yeah, it was just a misdemeanor.
If you didn't hit anybody or cause any injuries, but now it is an aggravating factor to an aggravated DUI.
Which is felony. It goes that
Right.
takes that from misdemeanor to felony for those who don't know.
And before there was just certain other like kids in the car,
Right.
you're suspended. You've got previous DUIs. This is your third one, so you no longer get the benefit of just a misdemeanor conviction. But if it turned out that was too much, or they're just filling up the prisons with something that maybe for whatever reason, were willing to turn the dial, whether to make it harsher or lighter
Right.
for things. I know they talked about getting rid of jury trials for your first time DUI, and it just kind of felt because they had the mandatory jail time that people were entitled to a jury trial, and
Right.
the legislature reinstated it.
Okay.
So we're really kind of I would probably hope that they would look at the changes of the marijuana law, because there was some tinkering with the drug DUI law with Prop 207, but generally the responsibility is for
Correct.
the officer. It's not just enough to show that, hey, they had weed in their body.
Right.
Because again, even to a medical user, a recreational user, it used to be years ago that if you even had inactive
Yes.
metabolite in your body, you could be convicted.
Yep.
Even though any scientist could tell you, yeah, they could have had that. They could have taken it 3 weeks ago,
Right.
and then you drew their blood today. It's going to show up.
But
So the court sorted that out. The legislature was aware of it. They could have said, "We don't care," and added it, but they listened to the
That's
court
good.
and didn't make any changes. So it requires, the police at that time to show that there was an active psychoactive element of the marijuana in the person's body at the time of driving.
I remember I pulled over a young kid that, and whatever the reason is, I don't remember, but I ran him through, he said he had just smoked a little bit ago, and I ran him through FSTs, and I was like, well, you either smoked terrible weed and it didn't get you high at all, or just not impaired right now. And it's the sort of thing where because the scientific community has not come out and said that these are the very specific things, that what do you do? How do you prove impairment? Like, I want, in no way, shape, or form, I'm a medical marijuana patient. I don't want people impaired out there driving, flat out. I don't care what it's on, but these are the things that law enforcement needs, the tools that y'all need to be able to make the right decisions. And some of the pushback is always going to be from particularly this community and the public in general, is that, oh, cops are out there just to fuck with people, and they're just pulling over people, whatever. And that's where I come in. I'm like, well, no, it's actually not quite like what you think. There is a specific reason. Can't just make stops on anybody for no reason whatsoever.
Right. I like any profession. There are some bad apples, but most of the officers I work with are they want to serve their community. They want to protect their community, and one of the ways they do that is addressing people's driving habits, and if they're impaired to drive, because we can talk about it in a very hands-off sense, but when you've gone to a fatal collision and there's beer bottles or drug paraphernalia strewn about, it just says, but for if they just decided to do this at home or in another responsible way, I wouldn't be here, or I wouldn't be going to somebody's house to tell them that their loved one died. And the next question out of their mouth is going to be like, how or why? And I usually have to tell them, and it's, I'm really glad they had that extra drink, or that, the extra amount of marijuana or whatever drug they had, because at the end of the day, we all should be adults and make those decisions that if we follow the regulations, if we listen, have a conversation with your doctor, have a conversation with somebody who's in the know.
Right.
I mean, ask a police officer. I mean, one of the questions I always ask a DUI suspect is, do you feel the effect? Would you drive a school bus right now?
Right. There's a good
Do you
question.
have kids? Yeah. Would you be driving your kids in the state I found you when I stopped you? Oh no. I mean, and if they don't, and their blood comes back at a 2.0, then they're just drunk. I mean, who's thinking that? What decisions is this person making? And most people are very honest to that question, and they just don't think about it. And it's, the effect of drugs is the first thing it affects is usually judgment. And it doesn't matter what drug it is. But it also is just something that we should be cognizant about. One of my favorite questions for regular medicine or people that are prescribed medications is, do you ever look at the stickers on, does your medication that you take for whatever pain you have from the pharmacy, does it have a sticker on it about car driving, or it might be dangerous? Yes, it does. But they didn't think about that until I'm bringing it up with them, and I've probably already arrested them or about to. And I would just ask people to think about those things and know yourself. My question is, alcohol is pretty standardized. Like if we can talk about a glass of beer, most beer containers come in a 12 ounce. Yes, there's 20 ounce and there's even bigger ones. But if we were just to standardize it, a beer, is 5% alcohol, maybe 0.5% if it's from Germany, more or less if it's from Utah. I don't know. But 80 proof whiskey is 80 proof vodka,
80 proof whiskey.
is 80 proof tequila. That's a medical or a scientific standard. I've often wondered, I mean, cannabis comes from a plant that
Right.
can be manipulated.
Yes.
Just like, under federal law, to be called bourbon, it has to meet certain
Right.
very specific criteria. And one of it is the proof.
Yes.
Whereas, people growing their own marijuana, it really depends on
Their skills.
what agricultural
Mhm.
or what is it, like growing roses.
So let me, if you're unfamiliar,
I'm unfamiliar.
let me
with that.
educate you on this too as well. And again, nuance here. I'm not 100% perfect on everything. There was a federal study in the late 80s, early 90s to show the bad of the use of cannabis in the human body. And they actually these scientists actually discovered the endocannabinoid system. Endo-internal cannabinoid is what they called the receptors. And it was discovered that we have receptors all over our body. And the cannabis plant creates cannabinoids. Cannabinoids. That was interesting. Sorry about that. Cannabinoids. And so what happens is that the cannabis plants, CBD, I'm sure you've heard of CBD, correct? Cannabidiol, however you pronounce it, THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. These are parts of the plant that actually mesh perfectly with the CB1 and CB2 receptors inside of our body. So this is part of the reason why cannabis affects everybody a little bit differently. One, and here's the other thing too, and I'm not patronizing you in any way, shape, or form. Are you familiar with the fact that the Drug Enforcement Administration themselves have actually admitted to the fact that they recognize nobody has died from simply the ingestion of cannabis?
No.
On their go to their latest book of drugs, their big thing, little disclaimer on the bottom that says, you cannot overdose on cannabis. No matter how much you smoke, because our bodies are perfectly adapted to take it. And here's the other thing too. We all know that, with certain drinks can affect people a little bit differently. I mean, there's certain stuff in it. So every single plant, not only does it have THC in it, but there's a whole myriad of other cannabinoids in there. There's a whole myriad of different terpenes and different flavonoids and all that stuff. All the stuff that you get out in foods and drinks, flowers and all that you smell out there, the cannabis plant has as well. And when it's ingested into the human body, those things attach within the body and help with inflammation and help with antivirus or antibacterial stuff and antiviral stuff and all that. And my cannabinoid system is different from yours. So we could both use the same strain, however you choose to use it, eating it, whatever, and it will affect you completely differently than it will affect me, because it might not even have the stuff that gets you high because your body's absorbing different parts of it. So the cannabis plant actually, it's one of these things where our body naturally knows what to do with it. That's why you can't overdose from it. Whereas alcohol is a poison. You're feeling the effects in your brain.
The moment you take it, your body's trying to get rid of it.
Yes.
Because it sees it as a threat.
Yes. So when you ingest alcohol and you feel those effects of alcohol, that's actually the poisoning of your brain. That's what's you're poisoning your body. That's what's causing the effects. Again, hey, I drink too, so I understand the effects and all that. But the cannabis plant, now again, you can get seriously high off of weed. I'm not saying you can, and I'm not defending anything, but I'm saying that there is different parts of it that the human body takes and utilizes, every single human being. And what you may be deficient in is something that I may not be in. So different strains can affect people. And that's the problem when it comes to the science of cannabis is, again, we could both be growing and grow the same strain,
but have different effects.
But have totally different effects, have totally different cannabinoids, because it's a plant. It's, everything is a little bit different, and it's a plant. So when it comes to what is prescribed or what is suggested to use, there's no standardization.
Right.
This is my beef with the medical marijuana community, not in a bad way, shape, or form. I'm not mad at anybody. I'm just saying I wish I could go and say, I have back pain, and this strain has these anti-inflammatory properties, and this one would be the best. But it's not to that level yet.
Is there any concern within the medical marijuana community that, should the federal government legalize it, that one of the big pharma companies will just come in and obliterate the entire local system?
I can't speak.
And make it like you're shopping at CVS and, oh, that one's good for back pain. And
I'd be okay with that as long as it was cannabis.
Right.
You know what I mean? As long as they were just growing cannabis, I would be okay with that personally. there are, and again, I am not speaking for any dispensaries or anything like that because they're multi-million-dollar operations and all that. But I do know that there is some concern regarding the pharmaceutical companies and all that good stuff, and they're trying to keep it all in-house. So yeah, I can't speak to it, but I prefer mom and pop. I prefer, the hard part about cannabis is that I like my medicine, but I also don't mind the side effects of the medicine too. I like my back to hurt, but then I also like the euphoric feeling it gives me, or the fact that it helps me sleep. And I could talk, one thing I also do want to talk to you is about mental health and law enforcement and all that stuff, because again, part of my mission in life and goal is to help people in mental health and all that. And I can tell you that the use of cannabis for mental health has helped me personally and a lot of people. And this is just sort of one of these things where it's anecdotal stories because we don't have any testing to find out, is it helping? Is it hurting? I'm all for science. I'm all for trials. I'm all for double-blind placebo studies. I'm all for that stuff. The hard part is that because it's still federally illegal, these studies cannot be done. The data can't be out there. We can't give law enforcement good science, good data, because the federal government's saying, no, you can't do data on it. You can't do. Right. So it's like, how the hell do we get past this? How do we?
Well, that's, I could just say from the law enforcement point of view, I mean, it was easy. I mean, marijuana, for all of its, when it was illegal, it had the best giveaway. I mean, wow. Where is it?
Friday night, you haven't had an arrest all week.
Because your driver's license, and go ahead and put wherever the marijuana is, go ahead and put it on the passenger seat. Even alcohol can get past. There's certain types of alcohol you can either mask it or it's just not there.
Yeah.
But marijuana, I mean, if you have marijuana that doesn't smell it, is it marijuana?
It's really bad marijuana.
I mean, I've had it. The other thing is the smell doesn't linger, because I've had it like in my patrol car to take it to property, and then as soon as it's out, and I drive with the window down for 5 minutes and it's gone.
As long as you didn't smoke it.
Okay.
And I showed you my thing before. My biggest rule for any patient, anyone else, there is stop smoking weed in your car.
Yeah. It's hard to, you never have too much evidence, and a good officer, if they catch you driving and using at the same time, they would probably be negligent if they didn't immediately go to field sobriety tests.
I do agree with that.
And like HGN, which is the primary for alcohol consumption.
That means the horizontal gaze nystagmus of the eyes. He's talking about the eye test that you see officers doing on the side of the road.
And also like referees in MMA fights and boxing matches use it to determine whether somebody's taken some serious. There's several ways to get it, but the most common is through alcohol consumption. You can be in a rollover collision, or you spin yourself in a chair, and right before you vomit, you will have it. But in most cases, it's triggered by alcohol consumption. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Correct.
If you consume alcohol. There's no amount of training or practice or athleticism, because I have run athletes through field sobriety tests. The HGN showed a lot of alcohol on board, but because their bodies were in such shape that they were able to perform the field sobriety test with dexterity.
Right.
And it's not like they were trying to break them. It was a football player. It was a college football player who was underage and shouldn't have had any alcohol in his body, but I was surprised at the amount of alcohol that was in,
because he did so well on the FSTs.
He did so well on the field sobriety test.
Gotcha.
So, but marijuana doesn't necessarily have that.
Right.
So we do lean more towards, let's say, if you are an athlete with marijuana on board, most cops' biggest fear is to arrest an innocent person.
Right.
And one of the reasons HGM was developed is so many cops were, if you went out with date night or wherever and had a drink or even two, and you're a grown adult with no other medical concerns, I don't want to get in the way of that. I want to send you on your way. Hey, here's a warning for the taillight, or, stop driving in 2 lanes at once. But the other biggest fear is, what if that person drives down the street after I release them and then drives over somebody?
Yep.
So the field sobriety tests are designed to kind of give officers a tool, among others, to determine if somebody's impaired to the slightest degree, which is the legal standard in Arizona. I would really like to see some more of those specific to marijuana, since I think it's here to stay. It's only its use, whether recreational or medicinal, is going to expand.
It's not going away.
Hopefully the scientific community can do that.
It's not
can
going
provide
away.
us that bridge.
No, agreed. And one of the things that I have a concern about is if I get pulled over and I'm just leaving the dispensary, whatever the case is, I can no longer physically do some of the FSTs because of my back injuries, because of my ankle injury, because of those things.
What does a sober person say?
Oh, I'll do them. I can't even do those when I'm drunk, or no, I can't do those when I'm sober. Yeah,
Usually,
everybody says that.
The best one is, can you say the alphabet backwards? The proper response to that is no.
No,
Who could do that?
who could? Yeah, no, they're not a human being
It's
on
the
the
person
planet.
that tries that makes me think they've had too much to drink because their inhibitions. I'll give it a shot. Hold my beer. It's that kind of mentality. I'll give it a shot. So I don't even like to use that one because I think it's so diabolical. But I can't remember where I was going with that. But just the loss of inhibitions or something like that.
And having personal experience in both, I've drank, I've been drunk, I use cannabis for my back pain, and I've also used a little too much cannabis and just gotten high. Totally admit that. You don't lose your inhibitions with cannabis nearly as much.
With alcohol.
Nearly as much as alcohol. Actually, I would say there have been times where, I'm whining and complaining my back hurts, and I'll go out and use my medicine, and I'll come back, and my wife has no idea. And it'll be like 45 minutes to an hour. She'll be like, hey, why don't you go out and use your medicine? I'm like, well, I did an hour ago. She's like, oh, because you just, because again, there's reaches a point where you're using it responsibly and properly and all that stuff. And again, I'm not opposed to people getting high recreationally. I don't care. I'm just simply giving my personal experience regarding the medicinal side and all that.
The other thing too, when we talked about, being the good patient, is the dispensary. So the traditional way we found we'd get marijuana, it was in a bag,
right?
Usually a Ziploc bag, something you put your sandwich in,
right?
I don't get medicine from the pharmacy in a sandwich bag,
right?
Okay. Now I know we're probably not. Well, actually, I have seen dispensary medication that looks like a medicine bottle,
sure,
or has the dispensary's name on it, something, a lot number, something that is more like a prescription than an illegal substance from a foreign country.
Agreed.
So keep it in that.
But I'm going to push back you a little bit. They don't have to.
They don't?
No. Legally. Now, administratively, DHS has written rules to dispensaries in which the medication must be dispensed.
Okay.
But legally,
once it's in your possession, you can move it.
You can move it however you want.
So again,
I agree that it is good practice.
I would just say again, so you're rushed out of the house. You have your marijuana that you've switched into a, let's just say, non-dispensary packaging, and you don't have your card. Well, believe it or not, folks, people lie to the police a lot. And it almost gets to the point, I'm not so jaded that I think everybody's lying to me all the time.
Right.
But if your story changes 3 times,
right,
it's because you can't remember it. And why can't you remember it? Is it because you're on drugs? Or is it because there's so many lies you just can't sort through it all? I don't know, but I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes finding out.
And what you're talking about, though, too, is you have a legal authority to do that.
Yeah.
You have a legal authority, and you also have an obligation to the public, being that it's your job. That's what you've been hired to do, is to investigate things. And, that's what being a good cop is all about. And being a good patient is about providing, easing the process. And
I have an anecdotal story. So years ago, I stopped. I think I was working a DUI detail, so I was out around 2 or 3 a.m. And I stopped somebody.
There's no drunks out at 2 in the morning.
No, certainly not. I stopped somebody for a moving violation. They were driving in 2 lanes at once. I pull them over. Their eyes are red, somewhat glossy. They reek of alcohol. I mean, just a strong odor that I'm actually looking in the car, see if there's an open container somewhere. But at the same time, I'm having a conversation with the person beyond, hey, I stopped you for driving in 2 lanes at once. Let me see your driver's license, insurance, registration. Where are you coming from? Such and such bar. Okay. So that you're coming from a bar, that's plus,
right,
probably been drinking. But then he says, I'm a bartender.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. All right.
That changes
Do I
things.
believe him? Do I disbelieve him? What does he have next to him? A rolled up dirty apron, which probably is soaked in alcohol.
Right.
Not that I picked it up and smelled it, but let me move him from that.
Right.
Okay. So I asked him to get out of the car. All right. He complies. He tells me, because we're still having this conversation, I just got done with a 12-hour shift. Now, I bartended years ago. There's not many bartending jobs where you're seated.
Right.
Okay, you're on your feet. You're usually walking up and
Right.
down a bar, lifting heavy things, moving things around. If it's busy, like in this case, a Friday or Saturday night, you're tired. All right. Being tired can affect your ability
Oh,
to
100%.
slow reaction times, things like that. It mimics alcohol impairment or other forms of impairment. And I conducted the HGN gaze, and I didn't see any HGN. And I'm looking, I'm 12 inches from his eyes. They're red. They're not like a rat's red, but they're red. Like he'd just gotten done rubbing them.
Yeah.
Any medical issues, allergies, cold? No, I feel fine, that way. Okay, so I rule it out. But having that tool of HGN, I didn't see any nystagmus. Thank you very much. Let me go write your warning. Have a seat in your car. Well, I'll be back in a minute.
Yep.
And I didn't even go to the other field sobriety test because honestly, he probably might have showed some cues on there.
Agreed.
With the balance and the things like that, just from his fatigue.
Yes. Agreed.
And I probably could have just stuck a portable breath test in his mouth, but I just didn't. Having separated from his car, we're several feet away. I have no odor of alcohol on him, so it wasn't spilled directly on his clothes, or if it did, it dried up. And it wasn't on his breath. It wasn't seemingly coming out of his pores or something like that. So when we get the smell, of marijuana in the car on the public street, it's almost like the same thing. There can be a rational. If you tell me you're a medical user and for whatever reason, because your wife doesn't want you doing it around the kids for whatever reason, you go and sit in your car because it's air conditioned and secluded and you smoke it there. But then you slept for 12 hours and then you drove to go get milk and then I pulled you over and you rolled it up with the, I'd like to, when you show me your medical card, when you say, I used it 12 hours ago and the smell is faint. We look for those consistencies because I don't want to arrest an innocent person or somebody who's just following the rules for something that they're not. It's not perfect. The standard for arrest is different from the standard for a conviction. And rightly so. We can't have court on the street as much as we'd like. And if you are in a DUI investigation, there's certain rights. I would recommend you talk to an attorney so you know specifically what those rights are in your specific jurisdiction. But there's no reason to, I've always trained other officers. If somebody exerts their rights, that's their right. And in certain cases, it makes things faster and simpler.
I agree 100% with what you just said. And because I have asked, because I have seen, and I'm just going off of what you see on the videos now and all that, where the officer gets very upset when somebody says this, and I was the same way. I'm like, buddy, I have what I already needed, and I don't need you to talk to me. And if you don't want to talk to me, okay, just sit here quietly. Unfortunately, though, there are several officers who don't feel like that, who feel as though the person is not complying, who feels that they're not cooperating and has that attitude. And unfortunately, every officer is different.
Well, I think when you feel, if you're not sure, one, do whatever the officer says, unless it's ridiculous.
Let me give a caveat. As just like you said, the side of the highway is not the place to argue. There is a courtroom for that. There is a process for that. It's not the place to resist it or anything like that.
One of the things, this is getting a little bit away from the topic, but police officers are dealing with, I wouldn't say a hostile public, but people are more in tune with, is this that kind of officer?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. So we'll go to traffic court for nothing DUI related. And the argument is, well, he did it because of the color of my skin.
Okay.
My response to that is, if that's what they truly felt, they were so upset by that they didn't bring it up until here, now at a civil traffic hearing, which you have to admit, that's a self-serving statement.
Yep.
Don't you think they should have maybe called my supervisor? If they think I'm giving out tickets for something like that, shouldn't my supervisor be made aware of that? Because maybe you're the fifth one that's had that experience. And my supervisor would know that.
Right.
The traffic hearing judge isn't going to know that.
He has no idea.
He has no idea. And if you don't, and I can understand, there are people like, well, the sergeant's just going to cover for the officer. There are specific institutions or attorneys that will assist you in, oh, that name's come up again. Because if it's systematic, you're not the only one. And those are the people we need to root out in the profession.
Do you want to work with racist cops?
No.
Do you want to work with bad cops?
No, not at all.
And I ask you those questions. I ambushed you just now because of the fact that, unfortunately, there's been a big push that all cops are this and that. And it's like, no, they're not. And you're hearing it straight from an officer's mouth that they don't want to work with bad cops.
Judging an entire group of people by the actions of a few.
This has been done before.
It's been done before, and it's bad.
Yeah.
People should be judged by their individual actions. And there's, I think a lot of what frustrates people is the idea of the blue line, or they cover things like that. There's also the issue of there are certain nuances. I'm an attorney. I see things through the prism of legality.
100%.
If somebody doesn't yield to me while I'm making a traffic stop and drive away, I have the legal authority, because they're committing now a felony,
right,
to pursue them. But let's just say the reason for the traffic stop to begin with was their tag was expired by 5 days. Do I want to race down Central Avenue at 62 miles an hour in rush hour traffic because I have all the legal authority to do it?
Right.
But let's take a step back.
Right.
Is it the right thing to do? No.
10 years ago, would you have?
I would have been in a different part of my career. I still probably know I was a little bit older when I became a policeman.
Okay,
it doesn't mean
enough.
just because you're young, you're out there a loose cannon. It's just life experience in almost every profession is a benefit, and there's a balance. I mean, if you've never seen how a pursuit can go bad, and I've seen bad ones, and they were legit, like a bank robber run. I mean, you're not going to let him go.
No.
We're not going to call that one off, no matter where they go, what time of day. We'll do things to try to mitigate harm to even the suspect and ourselves, and certainly the public. But there's certain things we're just not going to let go. But one of those is, if I can sit there and, what was all this for? Imagine yourself in court. Well, his tag was 5 days expired. It's not even a crime. It's a civil infraction.
And I would say that I'm probably in the same boat as you. 10 years ago, dude, I would have chased I did chase everything. I did. Mm-hmm. Now looking back, I'd be like, no way. Just let him go.
It's not worth me getting hurt.
It's not worth it.
It's not worth them getting hurt.
But one of the things that I'm trying to show to this community is the fact, though, that just because you got pulled over and now the caveat is always, there are cops that will pull people over for no reason and harass them. And that's not what I'm talking about. Those people need to be rooted out. If you feel that's what's happened, take the necessary steps to report that, call their supervisors, whatever the case may be. But I'm trying to show the fact that, okay, you got pulled over, you may have gotten a ticket, maybe the officer took your weed for a little bit, verified things, gave it back, maybe you didn't like his attitude or whatever the case is. Okay, I understand that. There's a balance between enforcing the laws, civil liberties, but we also have to be cognizant of that. Not you're in the profession, but me not training, but teaching people and helping people through this process, is that there's just flat out criminals out there that don't give a flying fuck about you, me, or anybody else, and will hurt people and will kill people, and those people have to be stopped. So my question to those who want to defund the police and who want to I don't really know what they want to do, and I'm not talking about any specific group in general. I'm just talking about the feelings, as well as how are we going to stop those people? How do you come up with a plan to stop those people and maintain the balance and the order of maintaining civil liberties? I mean, one of the examples I can think of is, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're aware, Timothy McVeigh, Oklahoma City bomber, was caught because of a tail light out.
Mm-hmm. Warren Jeffs, Colorado City. He was from Colorado City. But I believe it was the Nevada Highway Patrol stopped him for a civil traffic infraction and had no idea he was in the car.
And he was for those who don't know, it was all kinds of sexual misconduct and cult type stuff.
He had a warrant out of Texas.
Yes.
And once they identified him, they served the warrant.
This is the balance. It's because look, man, I'm a private citizen now. I don't want to get pulled over. I don't want to get hassled. I don't want to have to sit here and explain my weed and this and that. It's medicinal. I don't want any of that stuff. But at the same time, though, I drive the most basic dadmobile on the vehicle now, that if a suspect got into my vehicle or, a type vehicle, I'm going to get pulled over because there's a million of them out there that all look alike. And I'm okay with that. And I need to be okay with that because it's part of the process of how we keep citizens safe, the civilian, the whole thing churning, and, the letter of the law, and we're a country of laws, we're a nation of laws. And this is part of the process. It's not perfect. We're not looking for perfection here.
And the other thing is, when people are stopped, a lot of time they individualize it. When
Yes.
there is an officer that they love certain violations,
Yeah.
and none of these are.
No.
I mean, we hate murderers and we'll always arrest murderers, but we don't really see murderers walking down the street.
Right.
But we do see people that say cut the gore point, which is a moving violation and somewhat dangerous in cases. So a lot of, say, an officer, but you talk to the violator and they don't even know what they did,
Right.
Because they don't know what a gore point is,
Right.
and I don't, there's no requirement that you know what it is, but you can't say I didn't know that was against the law. Even though nobody in their right mind has the entire traffic code, let alone the entire legal code memorized. But the officer can educate them, and don't personalize it. I mean, if it is what it is, and if you truly feel that you aren't responsible, there's a mechanism for that.
Right.
But don't come down on the police officer for doing their job. I mean, he didn't create that law. He's sworn to enforce the law. And we all know that there's some laws are probably more important than others, but we don't go door to door.
Right.
We get a lot of what turns out to be bigger crimes are based on traffic stops.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily just the warrant arrest. I know in cases where a simple traffic stop has resulted in a seizure and several arrests of child pornographers.
Yep.
And it's amazing how those things can just, in the course of an hour, what'd you stop him for? Well, you didn't have a license plate. And, I turned out his license was suspended. So I, used the impound law, and I was conducting an inventory of the car. These are all legal steps. I had no intention of arresting him.
Right.
And then I came across what is obviously a person significant, at least in my opinion, but I don't know. So I asked another officer who concurred. And ultimately we called a pediatrician because they know, an underage body or anatomy.
Right.
And then they made the call, and then we knew we had a serious crime here. So we went, and while those are rare, you just never know, and officers have to be prepared for that. And it may just be, here's your warning, move on.
Right. Right.
So it's a lot. And then there's always just the issue of, did I just pull over somebody who robbed a bank and they know it, but I don't. And they think I stopped them because they just robbed a bank. And I'm walking up there because their tag's 5 day expired.
Right.
So,
and those are the people.
Those are the sort of things that run through police officers' heads. So when they respond like that, and like any profession, officers have different points in their career. They're human like anybody else. They have families, they have divorces, they have deaths in the family, they have stressful times. It's not an excuse. Again, a call to the supervisor. I remember one time I got a complaint for driving aggressively on the roadway. And my sergeant pulled up my history of that day and was, what time was it? And he's talking to the person. And he's like, he was responding to what was thought to be a fatal collision at the time.
I'm assuming you probably didn't have your lights and sirens
I
activated.
was using them selectively to get in and out of traffic.
And that's
because the nature of traffic at that time required it. And I would be the first to say it probably looked very aggressive because I was trying to get somewhere quickly.
Because what some people don't realize is you're able to actually respond quicker without the lights and sirens activated. And this is again, is like, who's going to be the first on scene to a collision where there's serious accidents? A police officer. The fire department, God bless those guys. They're chilling in their firehouse doing their thing, so it's going to be a police officer.
Right.
So, but I don't mean to interrupt you. Continue.
And, that citizens, once we told him that, it was like, I'm really sorry I wasted your time. Have a good day.
Right.
Like, and if it's like, it says here you were going to dinner.
Right.
I'm sure it would have been a very different situation. And that's where I just, I don't know of a police agency anywhere in the country that doesn't have a mechanism for the public to address and educate themselves as to how police operate, because it's, the academies aren't open. Maybe some of them are, some of the college ones, but policing is a very hands-on, lessons learned. We need to give those back. I mean, there is a lot of like, these are the laws, memorize them.
Right.
But it doesn't, once you get out of the academy, there's just a practical application that not everybody gets. And some people shouldn't be police officers, and they learn it as they try to apply those things. But it should always be open to the public. And I encourage people to take ride-alongs. It may be a little bit difficult now with the virus, but
Right.
Generally those are available. They usually agencies select officers that are amicable
Mhm.
or enjoy, like field trainers or general instructor type officers that enjoy conveying that information. I love educating people about police. I've actually
here.
gone back to law schools after I've graduated,
Same here.
and
Hence the podcast.
and I've gone to criminal procedure courses, and I've said, I'll tell you, police and lawyers learn criminal procedure, but we learn it in completely different ways.
Yes.
Lawyers learn it by reading case law. We learn it on the street, like, is this, that, is that, a new officer doesn't know the nuances of reasonable suspicion, probable cause,
Right.
beyond a reasonable doubt. A lawyer certainly does. But I've put lawyers in scenarios and said, do you think there's reasonable suspicion to, or is there probable cause to conduct an arrest? Oh, no, you don't have enough. And then I just simply pull out some obscure case law that says, yes, I do.
Right.
And, they're amazed. They're dumbfounded.
And,
So,
and that's why we have three individual branches of government. The executive branch, which law enforcement is a part of, it's all the checks and balances. If you would have, there is a difference that in between just being a bad officer, making a bad arrest, charging somebody, making somebody's life hell, and good faith and case law and doing things the proper way and all that, and letting the system play itself out. And unfortunately, the system is not perfect and does cost money to defend yourself and all that stuff. But at the same time, you, being the police officer, I want you to build a good case. If there's a pedophile, I want you to do as good a job as possible to collect as much information as possible to be able to charge that person, because I don't want them near my kids.
yeah, like that scenario I was telling you about the child pornography. They just stopped.
Right.
Stop. We're not taking the car. We're going to leave it here. We're going to write a warrant
That's outstanding. That's
before
good.
we do anything else with this car. And they got the warrant, and then they moved it, and then they searched it, and they did everything. But once it went from,
Right.
we got to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. It's just important for people to understand that there are certain exceptions. One of the other so the flip side of everything that's happened this year too is the other side is, people just believe that the Constitution is the law and that's it. And the Constitution is really just a framework, or as I explained it to my daughters, it's a bookcase.
Right.
All right. And inside the bookcase go books. So you can't put books outside the bookcase. The law has to fit, the statutes have to fit, or the regulations have to fit within the framework of the bookcase.
That's a very good analogy.
And if the bookcase doesn't allow for that book because it's too big, this is an analogy, then it's not right, and it can't be a law. It's just the process of how we do that. So I would tell people, no right is absolute except for maybe your right to life. But even then, at least in this state, there's a limitation to that. You
Right.
can be put to death.
Right.
Free speech, free speech, free speech. We've heard a lot of that this year. I can't walk into a movie theater, should they ever open up again, full of people, and scream fire.
Right.
It's speech, but there are limitations.
You're not free from the consequences.
You can't go up to a juvenile and give an sexually explicit conversation to them and claim it's free speech.
Right.
There are limitations. You cannot invoke human sacrifice as part of your practice of your personal religion and say, I'm free to do so because Congress shall pass no law infringing on that. So
that person probably wanted to survive and probably wanted to live.
Exactly. You can have all the consent in the world because they're a true believer too, but at some point society is going to step in.
Right.
And that's it. And if there's truly a question, contact an attorney and they'll advise you of your rights, because it could be different in different states and things like that. But few things are absolute. And I think just in today's society, some people, most judges, they literally, the scales of justice, it's balance. It's balancing the interests of society with the interests of individual liberty. And some people, sometimes the scales get skewed, but usually if it does, it either bounces back or finds its way to the middle again, usually depending on the circumstances. Because I remember at the beginning of this, I explained, 9/11 was my motivation. I don't know if you remember, AJ, I don't know how old you were, but could you imagine the elements of the Patriot Act going to Congress today without some sort of...
Man.
But I don't think the Patriot Act would have passed on September 10th.
No.
It was the act of
It was the
9/11
incident.
itself.
Yeah, agreed.
That metamorphosized the society literally overnight, that we the scale tipped away from civil liberties
Agreed.
towards the interests of society or preventing another 9/11 level attack. And at least in our democracy, the flexibility is there. Some of it's been repealed, some of it's still there.
Right.
Airport security is forever changed. The lines are longer. Presumably we're all safer, but
Presumably, because the government said so.
yes.
No, it's a balancing act. And what do you say to people who have an argument that they're unfairly targeted? What do you say? And I'm asking a genuine question here. I'm not baiting in any way, shape, or form. Like, how do you have those conversations with people about it? Because just like you, I worked here in Arizona, where it's a largely Hispanic population.
I usually ask for specifics.
Okay.
If it was a terrible traffic stop. He's a terrible officer. He shouldn't be a police officer. He shouldn't be in charge of people. Okay. What did he say that was so terrible? And I know people aren't, well, in a lot of cases they are recording these days, you know? So, and when somebody can't answer that, you know, a supervisor or somebody looking into something like that will just like, all right, did they hit you or harm you physically? No. Okay. Did they insult you personally? No. All right. Did they use profanity? Did they scream at you more? Because you remember, you know, it could be a roadway that's really loud or something like that. No. Okay. And it could just boil down, did you get a ticket that you don't believe you should have gotten? Well, yes. Do you understand that you have the right to go to court and argue, even hire an attorney to defend you? And the officer, it's his burden to provide the court enough information. And what's really is somebody's upset that they got a ticket.
Right.
Or there might be upset that I could have just been given a warning and I never would have done it again.
Right.
I said, well, you know, that's the officer's discretion. I can look, you know, like, well, I only got it because of the color of my skin. Well, I can look into that. You know, as an agency can look into that and say, let's look at that violation. Okay, they've issued 100 of them the last calendar year. And let's break it, you know, we can break it down by demographics because, you know, tickets are digital. So all the boxes can be used for data collection. Wow, look at that. He only does give tickets to people of that particular race or gender.
Right.
And that is a problem. We'll take care of it. You know, we're going to move on that. Or it's, no, it looks like he gives that ticket to just about everybody.
I can say
of all ages, colors, and genders, you know.
I can't speak for any other agency. I can speak for the agency I used to work for. I can say that there was a very good mechanism in place that if an allegation was raised, it was very much researched. It was not glossed over or in any way, shape, or form. Unfortunately, I could see in smaller departments possibly that being an issue. But yes, that's exactly it. There is a mechanism in place. It is the digital age. Things can be looked into. And if somebody does feel that, though, there is a mechanism.
As long as their voice can be heard. I mean, nobody likes to get a ticket. We understand that. I myself have stood up in traffic court. So, you know what, Judge, they did it. If you want to charge them $1, I don't want to make a poor person more poor.
Right.
Because all they're going to do is let their registration go or their insurance go or worse, the mortgage. Okay, I'm not here to do that. We just took 4 hours out of their day. They probably missed that from work.
Right.
We did get the $300 somehow. You know, I'm cool with that. The points are enough. Their insurance rates are going to go up. And I think people, if officers knew that they could say things like that to the judge in certain cases, you know, especially traffic and things like that, I think people would feel better.
You have a very unique
I do.
background
I mean,
in that.
I've never had trouble talking to a, you know, I've always, before I was an attorney, judge, can I address that? And they say yes or no. And, you know, the judge controls it. There was one case in particular. I stopped a woman with horribly expired out-of-state tags. And I wrote her the simple expired registration and she didn't say anything. She said, thank you. Sorry. I didn't mean the trouble. And she took me to court. I was like, you know, this is black and white. This is, you're either expired or not. And it's not like she was expired by one day and I was just being quick. She explained in court that she was in town because her daughter had become ill suddenly and had to be treated at the Mayo Clinic. So she couldn't bring her back to Texas. And that she was using her daughter's car because her car was still in Texas and her daughter hadn't been back, but her daughter was a student. So she was excused from the registration laws. And I had no reason to doubt this woman.
Right.
No woman could make this up.
Right.
No person could make this up in such a conviction. Because I've heard people lie in court.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I can't say I shed a tear or anything, but I was like, Judge, this is a non-moving violation. If you want to find her not responsible, $1 fine or no fine. He's like, I have to charge a fine, but it's going to be $1. You know, I think justice is served by that. And, you know, I think people really enjoy that. Of course, the person who was caught driving in 2 lanes at once or cutting the gore, you know, the argument's usually, well, that's that's actually dangerous.
Right,
You
right,
might
right.
hurt somebody, and right now the penalty is just a modest monetary fine, but the consequences could have been severe. I've never seen anybody die from expired tags,
Right.
so that's how I
Gotcha.
explain that.
I want to shift gears a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We've been at this for a little while, actually. I'm actually impressed. Um, you talked a little bit about earlier that officers have families, they have lives, they have divorces, they have this, they have that. And I'm going to stand here and say, from personal experience, I don't know of a single police department that is doing as much for mental health of officers as they possibly should. And I nothing is off limits on my podcast, and I will say that the reason why I am no longer in law enforcement is because of a mistake in my personal life, because I wasn't clearing my head.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't taking care of myself. I was drinking too much.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't smoking weed, I'll tell you that, because if I would have been allowed to, I would have.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get your take on the mental health of police officers who are, and this is again something that where the general public isn't aware of. I will go on the record and say that I believe that pretty much every police officer has a touch of post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm not giving it a call it. I'm not a doctor, but the nuance of this to me is the fact that it's not post-traumatic stress. It's 20 years every day, 10 to 12 hours a day. It's active traumatic stress.
Mm-hmm.
It's an everyday thing where you're going and my anecdotal story real quick is the fact that, when cop stories are cool, you get to do cool things, get to haul ass, get to, all the fun stuff. And when people talk about my past and all that good stuff, and they'll say, "Oh, tell me a cop story." I'm like, "Well, okay, do you want to hear the one where I, had a helicopter overhead and we chased the guy and jumped in the canal and, blah, 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 blah. Or do you want to hear about when I held the girl's hand as she died?"
Mm.
And that always kind of shuts people up.
Yep.
I
know
like,
exactly what you're talking about.
yeah.
I know for me, the worst experience I ever had as a police officer, I'll tell you, thankfully, I didn't have to get too involved with this, but I responded to a terrible collision. A SUV had fallen down an embankment, and for whatever this designed SUV, the gas tank is in the back. There were two kids in the car. They weren't infants, so they were like 7 and 10.
Okay.
Dad was DUI for narcotics. But anyway, he lost control of the car, went over the embankment, and endowed or landed on his nose. This caused the tank to rupture, and the fluid to flow down into the engine compartment with something ignited it, whether it was the heat or something. So it burned up quickly. And thankfully, citizens were there. And of course, they get Dad out right away. But because the kids are kind of higher up on the back seat and restrained, they were harder to get out. So they were more affected by the burns. One of them passed away right there, or was clearly not going to survive. One of the citizens had already gotten a hold of the mother who was at her job in a different part of the city.
Oh my God.
And I arrived with another officer at the same time. And as literally we're just is everybody out of the car, trying to relay the information to the dispatch to tell fire, the nature of the injuries. Here's the mother, handed me the phone. Could you tell her what's going on? I didn't know this woman's name. I didn't know the child's names. I really didn't even know what happened other than there was obviously a juvenile that wasn't going to survive there. And the fire department's coming down the embankment and doing what they can. And they're moving fast, which usually tells you
Right.
the fire department doesn't move fast unless they absolutely have to, meaning
That's not a slam. That's the truth.
the only difference is obviously is the time it takes them to get them to a surgeon.
No.
And we were probably close enough to a hospital that they didn't even want to wait for the helicopter. But it was that sort of situation. And I just, I had to just take a breath. I'm looking at all this, absorbing it, just trying to compose myself. What do I say to this woman? Because I do need her to be involved. I can't just say, we'll call you back.
Right.
Because she knows why we're there. And I actually just said, do you have a supervisor or a friend at work right now? I said, hand your phone to that person. And then I said, her family's been in a terrible accident. She needs to get to, and at this time I'm like, where is the child? Where are you taking everybody? And they're like, we're going to this specific hospital. I need you or somebody who's responsible to take her to this location as soon as possible. Do not run red lights, anything like that. But it needs to be, with all deliberate speed. And I told the woman, you'll get more information when you get there, but that's the one thing you can do right now. And at that point, it was another agency because the other embankment was on a different side of a jurisdictional line or whatever. We helped. We handed everything over to them. The scene calmed down. And it was my first real fatality with a child. And I didn't even have, at the time, I didn't have my children. But it was still, I mean, it's the most, it's like it happened yesterday.
Yep.
I can't get rid of it. No amount of whiskey can get rid of it. No amount of trying to forget, hypnosis, nothing will ever unsear that from my mind.
You're right.
And it's still, just talking or relaying that story chokes me up. And then, I was only 2 hours into my 10-hour shift.
Yep.
And rush hour calls are holding because we were dealing with this. We got to get back out there. So in that case, I had to pull myself together.
Yep.
I did go home early that day. I told my sergeant, he asked me very politely, do you need something more? He kind of did the liability, can I call employee assistance for you? And the ball's in my court, yes or no. If I say no, the sergeant's done everything he's required to do. It may be a little bit different now. But I wasn't intimately involved in the scene or anything like that. And I probably should have talked to somebody about it, or at least, run through it in a more therapeutic way. Because it is something that's now seared onto my head. And there's been a couple other scenes like that. Your first fatal's usually like that.
Yep.
But for whatever reason, kids are different.
Oh, it 100%.
As far as the effect it has on you. But officers don't have the luxury of, having seen that, I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to go see a therapist. I'm going to do some yoga,
Right.
Something that might be constructive in dealing with that level of trauma or stress or grief. Well, there's calls holding and we need you out there. So you got to put all that away and pull somebody over. And now let's just say it's somebody who won't give you the time of day. They were driving like a real bad driver, nothing criminal, and all they're giving you is a load of crap for wasting their time and this and that. And all you can think about is that kid and that conversation with the mother and hoping that the mother got there and hopefully, it could be different. And then this guy's giving you that. So cops, that's just, it doesn't happen every day, but that's something you got to think about with cops. And then at the end of the day, we're responsible for ourselves. The departments can help us. Some departments are better than others. If a department, I would ask departments that when they consider the health insurance that they get for their employees, all of them, make sure that there's a mental health component, or a robust mental health component. That way too, because just some officers are reluctant to come to the department and say, I want the department counseling program because they feel that they will now be outed. Whereas if they can just go to the private medical market and get a psychologist or a grief counselor or something like that and do it on their own time, they have that option. So I would encourage departments to do that, and then provide officers and employees with the tools of just self-assessment. Are you having sleepless nights? Do you use alcohol or other substances to calm down? And if so, is that level increasing?
Right.
Are you becoming numb to the earlier levels and have to increase the dosage?
I'm being honest, and I mean completely honest right here, not just because of the premise of my show. If I could get every cop at the end of their shift to go home and smoke a joint, I'm being serious, like for the mental health aspects and the unwinding part of it, oh my Lord, man, would it be a whole different world out there for you guys?
And it's not necessarily, that the marijuana is the catch-all. It
No.
could be doing a puzzle.
Correct.
It could be painting a picture. It could be going for a run. I learned that as I've gotten older. I went through the academy. I was never an athletic person. I ran at the middle. I had to work to get in the academy. And when I wasn't required to do anything anymore, I let it lapse. And I was a very unhealthy policeman. But going back, I had to get back into shape.
Right.
And I didn't have the academy to do that. And I've maintained it. And I can tell you it does wonders for my stress levels. It helps me balance if I do have a stressful night, I'm still tired because I have physically exerted myself.
Yep.
Or will in the morning. And that allows my body to focus on inner healing. I do use alcohol from time to time. But I enjoy doing puzzles. I'm very intellectual. I like to learn new things. I recently discovered YouTube, and just the volume of things that I never knew existed that you could watch are amazing. I've just scratched the surface, and I'm going to get much more into that, but I'm always constantly learning. That's kind of how I process things. My wife has always been, how can you watch TV, read a book, and even have music on at the same time. And I could stop the TV or take the book, and you could describe to me what's going on.
Wow, that's good. That's high level stuff right there, man.
And I said, I just can't. I've always read and watched TV at the same time, but I can't remember where the butter is. So I don't, but I would just whatever constructive coping mechanism the officer can find, whether it's beekeeping or volunteering, going to the gym, whatever it takes, just find it and keep at it. And if it's not working, get some help. There's just younger officers, I think, are easier. The older officers are probably more, it's my problem, I'll just keep it internal.
Yeah.
Young people are used to asking for help and getting help and expecting help and responding to help. So I think that might be a feather in the future of law enforcement.
See, and what you're touching on right now is something that I am not familiar with because I've been out of it for a little bit, but that's awesome to hear. And I also do, seriously, I thank you for sharing that story with us, with me. And I can't stress mental health enough. And I've seen counselors, and it's amazing what you don't know is bothering you. It's amazing what you don't like. Why is my world just turning upside down right now? And then you go and talk to somebody and get some healthy outlets, and you learn and discover more about yourself and can become mentally healthier.
Yeah.
And that's good for everybody. It's good for relationships.
Sometimes just telling somebody about it is enough. Sometimes it's not, and you have to do, it just shouldn't be. I used to joke when I was single, policing was my focus.
Right.
It was everything, but I've learned that the balance is important.
Yes.
Even when I was an attorney, the agencies I worked for, they always preached or discussed the work-life balance because it's very easy to be overwhelmed. I mean, crime's never going away, folks.
No, it's not.
It's either it may metamorphosize into more important areas. And the other thing about modern policing is you can do something for 10 years, still be a policeman, switch gears and do something else and relearn a whole new aspect. Just like the law. I could just give it all up and learn to write trusts all day. It's the sky's the limit.
I went from, if you recall, I was 9 years in patrol, and then I was on the part-time SWAT team. And then I became a detective and was doing stuff that was completely different from the type of law enforcement I'd been doing for 9 years. And it was a whole new world. It was like, am I even a cop? I mean, it was doing completely, I had to relearn it or learn new things that were in law and all that. And one of them was child crimes, which was absolutely horrific. And it's terrible, terrible stuff that you got to deal with. And what is it that you think a department could do a little better at? And again, I'm not singling out any department. I know that the push has been for mental health, but from a boots on the ground type look.
Having the robust options for mental health diagnosis and outlets. Like I just think that departments should take steps to allow, a department can't have like a university's worth of special interests to address because officers will invariably pick up strange habit, carpentry. Well, we're not going to have a wood shop.
Right.
Most police agencies, it's not a stretch for them to have a gym that's accessible. Firemen work out on duty all the time.
It's expected.
They're completely reactive. There's very little proactive work, whereas in policing, there's both. And in many cases, you're not a cop unless you're proactive.
Right.
That's fine, but there's time where, we can just set aside some time for you go to the gym and you can get paid for it. I would also think it'd be important for the family to be somewhat involved in the agency, so there's a little bit of a connection. I know a lot of officers, they get to a point where they just want to keep it separate so that the automatic helpers, like your spouse or your close family members, they don't know what's going on. If you're not communicating with them, they don't know. I guess everything's fine. He would have said something, right? And I'm not meaning like the sergeant, hey, so-and-so had this today, but holiday parties.
Yeah, but what you just said isn't a bad idea. What if a supervisor called a spouse up and said, hey, man, trooper had a really bad day today? I know it's a little personal. I know it's a little personal.
Put my lawyer hat on. So now you have my supervisor talking to my spouse.
Understood.
About my day. So what if the officer tells a completely different story? What if it's for good reasons?
Yeah, no hiding. Maybe a simple, hey, trooper had a bad day.
So I wanted to let you know so and so was at a terrible scene today. There were children involved. It was very difficult. Well, he told me he was in the office doing paperwork all day. Maybe the officer did it to spare her
Yeah.
the sensibilities, but now you have the supervisor getting involved between the marriage. So
Yeah. I'm just trying to come up with some ideas.
what I would like to do is the spouse, we're all at different levels of our career.
Yep.
And maybe the spouse that's been married to the policeman for 30 years can have a conversation with the new spouse that just married into the rookie that's only been around for 2 years and say, oh, he's going to start having dreams. He's going to start having nightmares. And for some reason, the bullets in his dreams, the bullets in his gun aren't going to work, no matter how hard he tries. And he's going to have a recurring, or no matter what he does, the handcuffs won't clasp. These are standard cop dreams that occur at most cops' minds at some point in their career. And we know that one of the best ways to overcome that is through additional training. Well, why don't we put you through 5 hours of defensive tactics, which is handcuff use and things like that, or firearms manipulation and simulation and drills. Just train through the stress, because that's really what that is. I think if spouses knew that, they could be more helpful in recognizing problems, because I may not want to do something for myself, but if my wife tells me to do something, I'm probably going to do it.
Agreed.
She knows me better than I know myself.
I agree with that.
And I know not every family's like that, but I'm just, thinking of ideas. I don't know. So police psychological tests are usually looking for certain types of what it really is a personality test. And then there's usually a discussion with the patient, if that's even the way I would say the subject, because you're not actually getting treatment.
Right. It's right. You just go to the psychologist.
Hey, given your personality nature, you're going to have trouble with this or that. Are you okay with that? And yes, every now and then they might get somebody disqualified because they didn't pass the psych exam, but applying that again 5 years later, I don't think is going to solve anything. But just I think the best thing an agency can do is have tools or options for officers, especially to do it on their own. So like if there are health plans out there that don't even incorporate mental health.
Right.
And if that's the plan that the police officer's on, you're setting them up to fail.
That's not good at all.
Because they're not going to want to come in and I need to talk to the chaplain or something like that. And, something's getting overlooked. It's just, it's not something we can turn a blind eye to anymore.
No, and it needs to be talked about. And look, I am a emotional, mushy person. I admit that. I cry. I openly tell my friends that I care for them and all that stuff. And I understand that not everybody is. And I understand that there is I don't know what the proper word is, whether it's stubbornness or whatever the case is, but we cannot hide it anymore. You cannot not talk about it. And I commend, I don't know if you remember or not, but I said something stupid on the side of the road and I was totally joking around and somebody overheard it. And this is years ago, like in 08 or 09. I was having a difficult time with my ex back then. And I said something and somebody overheard what I said. And I'm not going to name that person, but he's a really good friend of mine. And he reported me up the chain of command out of care and concern. I got the phone call. I got to go back and do the psych test. And I was like, what is going on here? And then the story came out and I said something stupid and I was totally joking around, but I commend that officer for having sent me through it. Now, should he have probably come to me and talked to me? That would have been cool. But he didn't, and he didn't know how to approach me. He didn't know how to talk to me about it. So he sent me up the chain. But I can tell you that now, again, I'm no longer in law enforcement. I'm not worried about this stuff, but I can tell you that there was like, oh shit, am I going to lose my job? Are they going to take my badge and gun from me? Like, because I'm having a hard time dealing with something. So I could completely understand how that is I've had that roadblock of, if I go and divulge my deepest, darkest secrets about what I'm dealing with right now to a person who's technically actually employed by the department, what's going to get back to my supervisor and what's going to be thought of me.
Right.
So that's just one of the hurdles to jump over.
So that brought up an idea. So if a police officer does come to the department and says, look, I'm going through a divorce, or I have a death in the family that's really that's all I can think about. I think it would be incumbent upon that department to say, what do you need from us? What can we do? And the answer may be nothing. I just need you to know because I'm going to make some bizarre scheduling requests. And now you know why. Versus, you know what? I think I need to be off the road.
Right.
And what I hate is the seemingly about policing is that's the way it is, that's the way it was, and that's the way it will be. That's death. That's whatever.
Yeah.
It's going to come back and ruin. Now there are people that should be in their positions because of their experience and training, but that person comes to you. Maybe if they're saying they should get off the road, what can we do? Can we rotate somebody out of, say, the academy and move that person into that position
Right.
for at least the next 6 months, and then get that person out, kind of shake things up a bit, get the cobwebs out? I think that's good leadership and good supervision and good management. I know some people aren't going to like it. You do tend to, you start off weekend graves and then you work your way there. But at the end of the day, we are all police officers. Nobody got into it because of banker's hours. And while it's nice to have it when you do, there's always that, well, I'm going back out on the road.
Yeah.
And we should all never forget that. And to me, it would be, if I need to make space for an officer that's having a rough go and needs to be off the road and just maybe have more of a banker's lifestyle, teaching or doing administrative work, then that's probably best for me, because I'm in a better place and I should be the one out there on the road, because it's 90% of policing is mundane, but 10% or 5% is terrifying.
Yeah.
And you don't want somebody who's, thinking about something besides the terrifying event and is not capable of adjusting to it or reacting to it appropriately.
I agree. I think this is a good place to call it. And this has been a sincerely, insanely good talk.
I enjoyed it.
And the thing about it is that there's just so much to talk about when it comes to the cannabis world for me and the law enforcement world for you. And we're not even scratching the surface on anything. We're not even scratching this. And when I gave this idea about this, like, how do I do this? I don't know, but I have conversations with people and we have tough talks and we talk about it and figure out how to come together. What are some last words of wisdom that you could give to not only the public, but like I said, this is, cannabis related. What would be some?
With Prop 207, everything's new. The police officer doesn't necessarily know it. We haven't gotten much guidance from legal advisors and the county attorneys because it's just so new. The Medical Marijuana Act, when it came out, was kind of like this, and we're going to need the courts to sort some of it out. I think as a policeman, I always say, if an officer tells you to do something, to do it. If they ask you, that's a good time to ask a question. But if they're telling you to do something or ordering you to do something, just do it. You'll have your day in court. You will literally have your day in court. If you don't know how to do it, there are people that can help you do it. And just those are the situations. I watched the George Floyd. I watched a video of it where somebody had put all the video in chronological order, all the body cams and the stationary cameras of it. And it was just one of those that at any given time, I would have done this and it probably would have been the roadblock to prevent it from going to where it did. He's obviously on something. They all realize that.
Right.
Maybe getting him into the car isn't the maybe we just lay him down on the ground. He's handcuffed.
Right.
He's not going to crawl away. If he does, we'll just stop him.
We'll ring him back.
But let's let the medical professionals deal. He's not getting away. We'll do our investigation, but let's just take a pause. Let's not touch him unless we absolutely have to. We'll tell him to do things, but again, if he's lying on his back or on his side, we've made the harm at least possible. And I think if somebody had been there to do that and just got a little bit over focused, and we asked him to get in the car, we told him to get in the car, and then we had to make him get in the car when. Well, did he have to drive somewhere right then?
Right.
No, it's just, yes, it's safer to deal with the suspect handcuffed in a car as opposed to handcuffed on the ground. But there was enough indications that I think a prudent officer would have, taken a step back and just, why don't we let meds? This guy's on something. We should probably get him to the hospital.
Yeah.
Let's take him to the hospital. You've got the big van. It's easier to get him into that anyway. So, but just follow what the police say. If you have questions, ask them. The side of the road may not be the best time for it, but there is a mechanism every agency has for complaints. If you're charged or get a ticket for something, you have an automatic right to court and due process, and you can hire an attorney. And you can hire an attorney to address the agency through the complaint process.
Agreed.
If that's what you want to do. I know it's costly. There's not many pro bono lawyers like that work in that area, but if it's a problem, at least talk to somebody about it, because you may not be the only one. And then we might be dealing with a bigger problem.
Right.
And it may be nothing. It may be a complete and total miscommunication. You got the officer on the bad day that he just had an argument with his wife.
Or he just pulled that child out of the car who was dead.
You just don't know. And some, like I said with the guy, he was on his way to a fatal. I'm really sorry for wasting your time. People don't know. I bet you that guy was having a bad day that day.
Yep.
When he called, and it just came to perspective. Usually I would just say therapeutically a deep breath. Just take a deep breath, and, it is what it is. You'll get your day in court. I promise.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.